Silence in the jungle is never complete. There's always something: the hum of insects, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds. The jungle breathes constantly in 1,000 small sounds. But soldiers learn to recognize a different kind of silence, the silence that comes right before. In Vietnam, that silence might last 3 seconds, maybe 5, just long enough for a hand to reach for a device the size of a television remote, just long enough for a thumb to rest on a trigger. One click, and the silence ended. 1965. American forces were arriving in Vietnam in increasing numbers. They were trained for conventional warfare, open terrain, clear lines, defined fronts. Vietnam was none of these things. It was jungle. Dense, triple canopy jungle, where visibility extended maybe 20 feet, where trails disappeared under vegetation, where an enemy could be 10 yards away and invisible. Traditional tactics didn't work. You couldn't see the enemy to engage them. Artillery was imprecise in terrain where coordinates were approximations. Air support couldn't hit what pilots couldn't see through the canopy. And the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army understood this terrain intimately. They used it. Ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, appearing from nowhere, inflicting casualties, disappearing before any effective response could be organized. American patrols moved through the jungle knowing that at any moment, from any direction, fire could erupt, that the bamboo 20 feet away could conceal dozens of enemy soldiers, that the trail they were following could be leading them directly into a kill zone. The psychological toll was immense. Every step was a calculation, every sound a potential threat. The jungle wasn't just an environment, it was an adversary. And the conventional weapons designed for European battlefields weren't effective in this environment. Machine guns required visibility. Grenades required knowing where to throw them. Standard landmines could be avoided, bypassed, or simply wouldn't detonate in the conditions. The American military needed something different, something that worked with the terrain instead of against it, something that could defend a position or create a kill zone without requiring visibility. They found it in a weapon that had existed for several years, but had never been used in combat conditions like Vietnam: the M18 Claymore mine. The M18 Claymore is deceptively simple. It's a curved rectangular box, about 8.5 inches long, 5.5 inches tall, 3 inches deep. Weighs 3.5 pounds. Made of fiberglass-filled plastic, olive drab green. On the front, embossed in raised letters, "Front toward enemy." This instruction is necessary because of what's inside. Behind that curved plastic face sits a layer of C4 explosive, and embedded in front of the explosive, pressed into an epoxy resin, are 700 steel balls, each about the size of a BB pellet. When detonated, the explosive propels those 700 steel balls outward in a 60-degree arc. The balls exit at roughly 4,000 feet per second. The effective casualty radius is 50 meters. The danger zone extends much further. But here's what made the Claymore different from every mine that came before it. It wasn't triggered by pressure. It wasn't activated by trip wires, at least not primarily. It was command detonated. A soldier placed the mine, aimed it, literally aimed it, like aiming a weapon, then ran a wire back to a firing position. The wire connected to a small handheld device called a firing clacker. Squeeze the clacker, electrical current travels down the wire, and the mine detonates. One click. This changed everything. Previous mines were indiscriminate. You buried them, and they waited. When pressure was applied, when someone stepped on them, they exploded. This made them dangerous to everyone. Your side, their side, civilians. There was no control once the mine was in place. The Claymore gave control back to the defender. You could place the mine. You could watch the kill zone. and you could decide in the moment whether to detonate. If civilians walked through, no detonation. If your own patrol accidentally entered the area, no detonation. If a single enemy scout appeared, you could wait. Let them pass. Wait for the main force. If a full enemy unit moved into the kill zone, then you squeeze the clacker. This seems like a small distinction, but tactically, psychologically, it was revolutionary. It meant that defenders could set up positions with interlocking claymores, covering multiple approaches. When an attack came, they could engage with the mine most advantageously positioned. They could detonate in sequence, creating overlapping fields of fire without any friendly fire risk from indiscriminate explosions. In the jungle, where visibility was measured in yards, where enemy positions were discovered by contact rather than observation, this capability was transformative. American units adapted the Claymore to jungle warfare quickly. It became standard practice to set up defensive perimeters with Claymores. A unit would stop for the night, establish a perimeter, and place Claymores at intervals facing outward. Wires ran back to fighting positions. Soldiers took shifts on watch, hands near the clackers. If an enemy force probed the perimeter, if they attempted a night assault, and they often did, the Claymores provided immediate, devastating defensive fire without requiring the defenders to expose themselves or even to see the attackers. For ambushes, the Claymore was equally effective. A squad would find a likely enemy route, a trail, a stream crossing, a narrow pass through dense vegetation. They'd set up Claymores covering the kill zone. Then wait. When the enemy appeared, when they were fully exposed, multiple Claymores would detonate simultaneously. The engagement lasted seconds. By the time the enemy could respond, the ambush team was already withdrawing. But perhaps most psychologically significant, the Claymore could be set up in advance of a patrol route. If a unit was moving through dangerous terrain, they could place Claymores covering their rear, their flanks. If they were pursued, if they needed to break contact, they could detonate the mines to cover their withdrawal. This gave small units a force multiplier. 6 men with Claymores could hold a position against a much larger force, at least temporarily. 1 soldier with a clacker could control an area that would otherwise require multiple machine gun positions. The Viet Cong and NVA learned to recognize Claymore wires. They learned to watch for the telltale disturbed earth where the mine's legs had been pushed into the ground. They developed tactics specifically to counter Claymore defenses, cutting wires, turning captured Claymores back toward American positions, using long poles to probe ahead for wires. But even their adaptation to the weapon demonstrated its effectiveness. You don't develop specific counter tactics for weapons that don't matter. There's a particular psychological impact to command-detonated weapons that goes beyond their physical effect. With conventional weapons, there's a direct connection between action and result. You pull a trigger, a bullet travels, impact occurs. There's time, not much, but some, between action and consequence. Enough time for the mind to process cause and effect. With the Claymore, the connection is different. You squeeze a small device. Instantly, faster than thought. 700 steel balls are moving at 4,000 feet per second through an area you may not even be able to see. The person squeezing the clacker might hear the explosion, might see some effect. But often, in the jungle, in darkness, with distance, they see nothing. Just squeeze, and somewhere out there, something happened. Several Vietnam veterans described this in interviews years later. The strange disconnection of Claymore use. Squeezing the clacker during a night perimeter probe, hearing the explosion, then silence. Not knowing, not being able to know what the effect was, whether it stopped an assault, whether anyone was hit. Just the explosion, then silence, then waiting. From the receiving end, the experience was perhaps even more psychologically difficult. You're moving through jungle. Everything is unfamiliar. Every shadow could conceal threat. And then, without warning, without any visible enemy, without any indication something was about to happen, the world erupts in front of you. There's no time to react, no enemy to shoot back at, just sudden catastrophic violence from an invisible source, and then silence again. Several captured Viet Cong and NVA soldiers mentioned claymores, specifically when questioned about American weapons they feared. Not artillery. You could dig in against artillery. Not airstrikes. You could hear them coming. Claymores. Because you couldn't predict them, couldn't see them, couldn't defend against them. They just happened. The claymore wasn't a perfect weapon. Nothing is. Its effectiveness was almost entirely dependent on proper placement. The phrase "front toward enemy" was necessary because mistakes happened. In darkness, in stress, in unfamiliar terrain, claymores were occasionally set up backwards. The result was catastrophic, for the wrong side. The wires were vulnerable. They could be cut. They could be traced back to fighting positions. In some cases, Viet Cong sappers would crawl through defensive perimeters, find claymore wires, and turn the mines around before cutting the wire or simply pulling it tight to trick defenders into detonating mines aimed at themselves. The mines were also heavy and bulky by infantry standards. Carrying multiple claymores on patrol meant carrying less ammunition, less water, less food. Units had to make tactical decisions about load distribution. And perhaps most significantly, they were single-use. Once detonated, that's it. A defensive position with 6 claymores could repel 6 assaults, or 1 assault with 6 approaches. Once they were expended, the position had to be defended by conventional means. But despite these limitations, the claymore became ubiquitous in Vietnam. Nearly every American combat unit used them. They became as standard as ammunition and grenades. The introduction of the claymore changed how both sides fought in the jungle. American units became more willing to establish static positions, knowing they could defend them effectively with claymores. Night defensive perimeters became more secure. Small units could hold positions that would have previously required reinforcement. Patrol tactics evolved. Units moved differently, knowing they could set up quick defensive positions with claymore coverage. The mines provided a form of area denial without requiring constant attention or manning. For the Viet Cong and NVA, the claymore forced tactical adaptations. Night assaults, previously a favored tactic, became more dangerous. They had to approach American positions more carefully, probing for wires, watching for signs of mine placement. This slowed their operations, reduced their tactical flexibility. They also captured claymores when possible and used them against American forces. The weapon was simple enough that it didn't require specialized training. Set it up, run the wire, squeeze the clacker. Both sides used the same weapon, often in the same ways. This created a strange tactical equilibrium. Both sides knew the other side had claymores. Both sides had to account for them in planning. Both sides had to move more carefully, probe more thoroughly, assume any position might be covered by command-detonated mines. The result was a kind of mutual caution that slowed the pace of combat in some contexts, while making it more sudden and violent in others. When contact occurred, when ambushes were sprung, when perimeters were probed, the violence was more intense, more immediate. But the approach to those moments became more careful, more calculated. It's worth considering what it meant to carry the clacker. You're on watch. It's 3 a.m. The jungle is dark in a way that darkness in open terrain never is. No ambient light penetrates the canopy. You can't see 3 feet in front of you. You're listening. That's all you can do. Listen to the jungle sounds. Try to distinguish normal from abnormal, the rustle that's wind from the rustle that's movement. In your hand, you hold the clacker. Your thumb rests on the trigger. You've been briefed on the Claymore's positions. You know where they're aimed. You know the kill zones. And you wait. If you hear something, you have to decide. Is it enemy movement? Is it an animal? Is it your imagination? Is it another member of your unit who got disoriented in the darkness? If you're wrong, if you detonate on a false alarm, you've just told every enemy within hearing distance exactly where you are. If you're wrong the other way, if you wait too long, the enemy might get inside the Claymore's minimum safe distance. They might overrun your position before you can react. The decision has to be made in darkness, with incomplete information, with lives depending on it. And it has to be made by someone who might be 19 years old, 6,000 miles from home, in terrain they barely understand. That's not abstract tactics. That's the human reality of command-detonated weapons. Multiple veterans have described the weight of the clacker. Not its physical weight. It was light. But the psychological weight, the responsibility, the knowledge that squeezing that device might save your unit or might be a terrible mistake, and you wouldn't know which until it was too late to change your mind. The M18 Claymore remained in service long after Vietnam. It's still in the U.S. military inventory today, largely unchanged from the original design. It influenced the development of similar weapons by other countries. The concept of command-detonated directional mines became standard. Nearly every modern military has some equivalent. But perhaps more significantly, it changed how defensive positions are thought about. The idea that a soldier can control a kill zone remotely, can make real-time decisions about engagement without exposing themselves, became foundational to modern infantry tactics. Remote weapon systems, from simple command-detonated mines to sophisticated remote-controlled gun systems, all derive from the same basic principle: separation of the decision-maker from the weapon itself. This has advantages. It protects the operator. It allows for better decision-making under stress. You can observe, assess, then act, rather than acting reflexively under immediate threat. But it also creates distance, literal and psychological. The person squeezing the clacker doesn't see the full result, doesn't experience the full consequence of their action. Just the click, the explosion, the silence. Whether that distance is good or bad is a question without a simple answer. It's impossible to talk about the Claymore in Vietnam without understanding how the jungle itself amplified the weapon's effectiveness. In open terrain, you can see threats. You can maneuver. You have options. In jungle, especially triple canopy jungle, where the foliage is so dense that sunlight barely reaches the ground, you're constrained. You move on trails because moving through the vegetation itself is nearly impossible. You can't see more than a few yards in any direction. This means predictable movement patterns. Trails funnel movement. Stream crossings are limited. There are only so many routes through truly dense jungle. The Claymore exploited this. Place it covering a trail, covering an approach, covering any area where movement is constrained, and you've created a zone that can't be safely traversed. The jungle also limited the enemy's ability to spot the mines. In open terrain, a Claymore would be visible. In jungle, it could be placed 5 feet from a trail and remain invisible under vegetation. The vegetation also contained the blast pattern to some degree. In open terrain, the steel balls would travel in a wide dispersal pattern. In jungle, trees and foliage would stop some of the balls, creating a denser, more concentrated pattern in the cleared areas, like trails, where targets were likely to be. And the acoustic environment of the jungle, dense, sound dampening, meant that the explosion of a Claymore might not be heard far from its location. An ambush team could detonate claymores and withdraw without immediately alerting enemy forces in adjacent areas. The weapon and the terrain worked together. Each amplified the effectiveness of the other. The M18 Claymore represents a particular moment in weapons development. Not the most powerful weapon, not the most sophisticated, but effective in ways that had little to do with raw destructive capacity. It worked because it understood the tactical environment. It worked because it addressed a specific problem. How do you defend a position or conduct an ambush in terrain where visibility is measured in feet? But more than that, it represented a shift in how soldiers engaged with violence. The separation between action and consequence. The ability to initiate lethal force without direct exposure to counterfire. The reduction of combat to a single mechanical action. Squeeze the clacker. This wasn't unique to the Claymore. Artillery, airstrikes, long-range sniper fire. These all create distance between the person initiating violence and the person receiving it. But the Claymore put that capability in the hands of individual soldiers, made it personal and immediate, while simultaneously making it abstract and distant. There's a paradox there. The soldier squeezing the clacker is making a direct, personal decision to use lethal force, but they're doing it from a position of safety, without seeing the full result, without experiencing the full weight of that decision. Is that good? It keeps soldiers alive. It allows for more considered decision-making. It prevents reflexive, fear-driven responses. Is that bad? It creates psychological distance from consequences. It makes violence easier, more abstract. The answer, like most answers about weapons and warfare, is probably both. Context matters. Intention matters. Application matters. What's certain is that the Claymore changed jungle warfare in Vietnam. It changed how positions were defended, how ambushes were conducted, how both sides moved through terrain. And it did so not through overwhelming power or technological sophistication, but through simplicity. 700 steel balls, C4 explosive, a wire, a clacker, one click. Sometimes the weapons that change warfare aren't the biggest or the most advanced. Sometimes they're just the ones that solve the right problem at the right time in the right way. The M18 Claymore was that weapon, and 60 years later, largely unchanged, it remains in service. A testament to a simple idea executed well. Give the soldier control, adapt to the terrain, and make the enemy's movement costly. The jungle is still there, the trails are still there. The tactical problems haven't changed as much as we might think, and somewhere, in some jungle, on some perimeter, someone is probably holding a clacker right now, waiting, listening, thumb on the trigger, ready for the click that ends the silence